Welcome to the B2B Word of Mouth Marketing Podcast. We're here to help you grow your business with the one form of marketing that really works.
I'm Bill Bice, and we're here because we believe inside every small business is a big business.
This is Bill Bice. I'm back with Luke Flynn. Hey, Luke.
Hey, Bill. How's it going?
I kind of feel bad saying this, but it's going great. And, given how difficult things can be in the world right now, but you know what, it's going really well. So I'm just hiding out in the mountains. It's beautiful here, and, we're doing really good and productive things.
I agree. We're busy as ever, maybe even more busy. And I think it's interesting. I'm connecting a lot more with my clients. I think people are happy to talk, a lot more happy to talk and have meetings and stuff, especially these days, because if they've been quarantined or they haven't seen a lot of people, I might be one of the only other people besides their families they see. So it's interesting. And I think things are going well. We're seeing good stuff from around, from all of our analytics. And, I think I'm actually at the office, but no one's here. So it's kind of nice that no one is here.
Yeah, I was there on Wednesday, and, the parking lot is empty. There was plenty of social distance. It's really interesting what you're talking about in connecting in this time period, because I think there's this ability to get a much deeper connection much faster over video compared to what we used to do, which would make a bunch of phone calls to then get to the point where you met somebody in person, and now you're jumping to video right away. And of course, we've been experiencing this for a while, because we went remote last late spring, early summer, which turned out to be great timing, because we didn't have to do it in a rush. And so we've had some experience building up to this time period where everybody has had to do it.
Yeah, we really got to jump on that. And I remember when of course, our company everyone who works here was super stoked on it, but there were like, oh, how are our clients going to feel that now we're remote? Like, they're going to think it's weird. And you're like, I mean, it's like, who cares? Like, I don't think they'll think it's weird, and it's better. And we slowly found like, oh, it is better. And now everyone is kind of saying, oh, wait, this is better. I was watching someone the other day who's like hardcore, like business dude, like hustle this, hustle that. And they were asking him, they're like, how do you feel about remote working now? And he was like, you know what? It works a lot better than I thought it would. This is actually kind of nice. And I was like, thank you. This is what we've all been saying. I like it. I think everyone we work with likes it. And it is interesting that I have had before this, we would call people, and it's never as effective, especially because I can't show you things on the screen, or even if I email you something, now you're on the phone. It makes it a lot more difficult to actually communicate about what we want to communicate with. And now people just jump right on Google Hangouts or Zoom, or whatever you're using. And even for my clients, I've seen they used to, have to send a bunch of messages and emails, and then maybe get on the phone, and then maybe be able to meet. But now they're able to just to kind of make a face-to-face meeting with videos. And I think it works for a lot more people. So I would be interested to see if this kind of continues. And what I've noticed is even in our internal meetings, it's kind of nice to be at, in a comfortable position, instead of maybe having to go to the conference room where you don't always necessarily need to go there. And you're kind of at your desk still. You can show people what you need to show them through the screen share. There's apps.
And even though we're a tech company, like the first 10 minutes of every meeting in a conference room is just screwing around with the technology in order to get it to work.
I remember that.
So it's really nice. You just pop on a video call, and there's the other side of that. Like, everybody's tired of video calls, but I think they're so much more effective, and you just immediately bring up whatever it is you need to look at and work on it together and draw little circles on it. It's such a faster way to get to the core of what you want to talk about. It does take some extra effort to really bring a team together when everybody's remote. And in pre-crisis, we would do specific things around that, right? We would put on events in order to bring everybody together and really keep the culture moving forward. Well, the crisis has added a whole other element to that. And so now we have to do other things in order to address that. So we've been doing a weekly company-wide video call just to check in with everybody and see how we're dealing with this. We've been doing online sessions with, doing the stuff we would do in person at company events and, playing games, just doing things that bring people together so that you keep building, building the team.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And in some ways they say, distance makes the heart grow fonder, where sometimes I don't, because the way we work, we have separate teams. And so I don't see and talk to everyone all the time. I can go, a month or two without talking to someone on a completely different team with a different job title. And then when you do see them in a meeting, it's like, oh, how are you? Like, I haven't seen you in forever. And it is kind of nice to catch up in that way. And then I completely forgot about that. You're right. We used to go to the conference room on on the teams I was in, and like twice a day. And it was always like, you have to get set up on the TV. And I remember how even just 2 minutes, you're like, we do this every day. Like, we should be a little faster, but then someone either needs to go early or a little bit later. And now it's not like that at all. I had completely forgot that was a thing in my life. But it is really interesting. The weekly meetings are great. And in our teams, we also have weekly meetings where we talk about, whatever we need to talk about. And I think it does help, because then you can actually have someone show you what they want to show you. And if there's an issue, or like we have an exploratory meeting where we talk about marketing and the new technology and this, that, and the other. And sometimes people will bring up things I've never heard of, or new products or services we're offering or we're exploring. And it's so useful for them just to pull it up on their screen and then kind of click through it on actual projects they're working on, than them trying to explain it to you and tell you where to click and, hey, go over here, do this. Oh, it's kind of like this. It's like, hey, why don't you just show me exactly what you're working on? And then, oh, hey, can you type this in? And then it all makes sense. It's helped our workflow a ton, I would say.
Yeah, and one of our real reasons for going remote was to be able to attract the best talent, because it's just something that our own team really wanted, and it's something we heard over and over again, and that part has really worked out, because there is a huge portion, and this is pre-crisis, that wanted to work remote, and that's only going to be on steroids from this point forward. But it does bring up some interesting, so I love how that has played out. But then you have the issue of, so it's one thing when you have an existing team who already has that cohesion and culture and you go remote. But then you start adding new people. And so I think there's some interesting issues when you're now remote and adding somebody new.
Yeah, I've been saying people are going to want to work remote for Silicon Valley is great, but this whole time I was like, why don't they just go remote? They do all their work remotely anyways. But you're right, there is an issue, and we are seeing that now with Twitter and Facebook. They're all saying they're going to work remote from now on. But the issue you're talking about is kind of training new people, and how do we bring on new people? And it is an interesting question, because before they used to you would sit them, I'm sure everyone listening to this, you would sit them right next to you and kind of go through your work, explain things, and then maybe look over their shoulder as they did things. And so being remote does offer new challenges, especially since you can't visually see what they're doing, what they're working on, and they're new, so you don't know their work habits. Are they a good worker? Are they not a good worker? You assume they are, but they're training, so they're not going to be productive anyway. So now, okay, should I ask them more questions, fewer questions, video call? And so it is interesting. And so we've had to find workarounds where the leader really, what we found is the best way to do is the leader really needs to take a leadership role, funny enough, and make the training happen. We have entire training sheets. We have like very long spreadsheets of everything they need to learn. And then it's really on the leader to say, hey, you're going to do this tomorrow. You're going to do this the next day. We're going to watch you. We're going to video call you, or you're going to take this call, or you're going to do that. And if you can't, then, ask us questions. And so it's been really interesting, where before I think it was more organic, like, hey, you can just, kind of talk to your coworkers when you're all in the same room. But what I've noticed is leadership can make it all work. If you have strong leadership, then you can have strong trainees. And without that leadership, if you kind of let people do their own thing, it does seem
It's
to
just
be
going to
less
it's
effective.
going to go sideways if you do that.
Yeah.
And so it requires that your training be much better, more structured. There needs to be, more formality in the training. But I think that has really worked out to our advantage because it's forced us to really evaluate our training materials and fix the things that were weak, make our documentation good really across the board. Because now when you have a question, that's what we want. We want you going directly to the documentation as
Hmm.
opposed to just immediately jumping to interrupting somebody else's workflow and asking the question.
And that's everyone, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of, organizational training programs and successful organizations, they talk about that. In order to scale, you need to have good documentation so they don't have to learn by osmosis. And I do know of, certain maybe past employees or whatever, that they wouldn't look at the documentation. And especially before we were remote, they didn't need to, because they can just ask someone, and they can ask someone else, and they can ask someone else, and always kind of get that help. But now, since you're alone, you're kind of almost forced to look at the documentation, especially when someone's going to say, "Hey, did you look at the documentation?" When you ask me a question, I 100% always say, "Hey, did you look at the documentation?" Because your answer is probably in there, especially since I wrote a lot of that documentation. And I personally know the people who wrote the rest of the documentation, and I have looked over it with them. And so you really need to go to the documentation. And I think I know it's maybe not the most exciting topics, but documentation is so important, especially when you're remote. And it seems maybe less important when you're face to face, because, oh, I'll just ask him. I don't know, there were some psychologists, I think, or maybe sociologists, and they did a study, and people in relationships, they almost take on an interesting thing where there's a silent agreement on who will contain what information, especially like in married couples. Certain people will hold certain information and the other person will hold the other information. And so they know that they don't have to hold it into their mind, so they can always go to the other person if they need whatever that information is. Maybe someone remembers all of the birthdays, right? So I don't need to remember it because my wife remembers all everyone's birthdays. So that's fine. And I think that happens naturally in a workplace as well. But when you remove that, when you become remote, you can't do that anymore. And you have to now understand how the documentation works. And if you want to scale and be a really good company, you need to write everything down that you do. And we do this for our clients as well, because sometimes they want to do things on their own. And it's a skill in of itself, but we have entire teams working on how do we have excellent documentation so that the rest of us can kind of go upon our work, and the trainees can read the documentation. And then you can come to me with any questions, or if the documentation needs updating, because we move fast here. That happens too. But it's such an important thing. And I would say number one thing, if you're going to go remote, you need to get your documentation game on point.
Yeah, and it really requires that you be self-sufficient. And I do think there's a portion of people that have a tough time with remote work, but I would almost argue that you're likely to end up with challenges there at some point anyway, because what that means is that you're not able to become self-sufficient. You're not able to figure it out yourself. And we need people who can do exactly that.
I think, and they've done studies on this as well, but the more responsibility you give people, the more responsible they typically will act. Of course, there's some outliers, but they've shown, especially in companies, especially in other organizations, maybe like the military or giant corporations, but when you give someone more responsibility, they will typically step up and act that way. And if you make, not that you're making people, but if you go remote and people kind of need to be self-sufficient, they'll figure out how to do it, especially if the fastest way to contact someone is via Slack. What if they don't reply right away? There's a lot of people I Slack because they're working, especially some of my work can be, I got to put my head down for 4 hours and come up with a bunch of ideas. I can't necessarily be slacking back and forth every 10 minutes because now you're interrupting. And so there's kind of that aspect. You need to be careful to not interrupt your work, but if you don't answer them, they're going to figure it out, right? It's kind of almost like one of those weird parenting things where it's like, don't answer his question. Just let him see what he comes up with. And then oftentimes you'll, oh yeah, hey, sorry, I was busy. Oh, I figured it out. Cool. Where before they would just say, tap me on the shoulder and kind of interrupt me. So that's been super cool that you can almost compartmentalize your communication and your distractions in a way. If you're disciplined, it's not always easy. I check my email a lot of first thing in the morning, and sometimes throws off the day.
Yeah, that could go either way, but if you really take advantage of being remote, then you can compartmentalize. You can get time periods where you're really getting into the flow and working deep. So I think that's another advantage. And what we're really talking about here is that you can't rely on the water cooler effect. And so you've got to put in the process, the training, the documentation that you can kind of get away without that when just everybody's together. But I think all of those things make the company stronger by not relying on the water cooler effect.
Right. Yeah, you can get a by if you're scrappy and determined and your team is, very fired up and maybe even a little entrepreneurial. You can get by with it. And if you have, especially if you have high talent, if you have like people who are really good at their jobs, you can get away with it. But you got to ask yourself, what happens when we start hiring people that, maybe the CEO doesn't know or your project managers don't necessarily know? We made a couple of recent hires and I haven't met them. Like there's some of the first people that we've hired, especially during the time of COVID. And so we're not meeting at all. So I haven't met them, where even before, like we would have little get-togethers maybe here and there. But so it's kind of interesting to be, okay, if I'm going to send them work over there, I have to just trust in the processes and in the documentation that they're going to know exactly what to do because we have it all written down. And maybe they'll need to ask for some help from some people, but eventually they have to get to the point where, hey, you just have to fully trust them because our processes are in place. I don't have to, I taught a lot of our current engineering team sometimes. So I'm like, oh, maybe I should go teach them, but that's not my job anymore. You got to trust in the people you taught to teach the new people to teach the new people, which is how you scale. And that's what we're all about with marketing automation, and scaling human capital is really the most important thing. Technology can only take you so far. And so you need to write, the piece of paper and writing may be the greatest human invention ever. So marketing automation, it should have its place as well.
Yeah, it turns out you have to know what to do with that automation. But I think this is the new reality. There's plenty of companies are going to go back to the office, but if you want the best talent, you're going to have to support remote work. You're going to have a lot of companies that just say, you know what, it's not worth having that office space anymore. This actually worked really well being remote. We're more productive. We're able to find the best people. And that's just going to be the model going forward.
It's interesting to think about this ramifications on a wide scale, especially where you see kind of what happened in New York and how badly they were hit. And when you think about, well, why do people live in New York City? To be close to their high powered job or whatever. But now if you have that threat of, a sickness, but also if you can work remote, like why would you, and it's so expensive. It is so expensive. Like why would you really necessarily want to live there if you don't have to? And I've even seen a lot on social media of people, Twitter announcing they're going remote forever. And people who work at Twitter are like, great, I'm moving to Utah because it's, I make 130 or 140 or 250 or whatever it is because they live in San Francisco, and which is like making 60 here. Why wouldn't you move to Utah? Now there's a double-edged sword because now they have to compete with a wider range of people, right? Now they have to compete with everyone in the country instead of just the people who can get to California. And so I think in some ways it'll increase the talent pool across the entire United States, but it'll also, I think, make things a lot more interesting from a real estate perspective and kind of where our civilization places, importance. Now we don't have to congregate there. And why would you? Now technology has allowed us to be wherever we want. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see if that continues. And I don't know why it wouldn't. And if it's really interesting to see the people on social media be like, oh, I never thought I would like working remote, but I really enjoy it. And everyone seems to really enjoy it. And then they get that hour or 3 back from commuting, and you know what I mean? They can eat their own food and you don't have to pay for the snacks that they eat, stuff like that. So it's interesting. And I'm excited for the future ramifications and to see, what other opportunities come from everyone working remote. I think it's purely a benefit going forward.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying not traveling right now. I would love to be traveling again, but
Yeah.
I don't ever expect to do it with the same level for business that I was before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge productivity gain also.
Right, for sales stuff.
Exactly. And so, it typically takes about 2 months to create a new habit. And, we're past the 2 month time point now. And so there are new habits getting created out of this. Well, Luke, this
Yeah.
has been a great subject. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. It's fun to talk about it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the B2B Word of Mouth Marketing Podcast. Join us each Monday for new episodes and visit boomtime.com to listen to prior episodes and check out episode notes. Have a marketing question you want answered? Email us at podcast@boomtime.com or tweet us at boomtime_online and we'll answer your questions on air.